The moment I opened the apartment door, I knew something inside had changed. Not the furniture, not the smell of reheated coffee drifting from the kitchen, not even the weak afternoon sunlight spilling across the hallway floor. It was the silence. A heavy, breathing silence, the kind that waits for you before it breaks you. I had just come home from a 3-day work trip, dragging my suitcase behind me, exhausted from airport delays, cheap hotel pillows, and smiling through meetings with people who never remembered my name. All I wanted was a shower, clean clothes, and my bed. But before I could take 3 steps inside, my roommate, Marceline, appeared from the shadows near the living room. Her face was pale, her eyes red, and her voice trembled as she leaned close and whispered, "You won't be sleeping tonight." Before we go deeper into this story, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of one small act to change a life, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Ancient Truth. Your support helps stories like this reach the hearts that need them most. My name is Soren Vale, and at 32 years old, I had learned to survive by not needing anyone too much. I worked as a regional sales coordinator for a medical supply company, which sounded more important than it felt. Most of my life was spent in trains, conference rooms, rental cars, and half-lit apartments where I ate dinner over my laptop. Marceline had been my roommate for nearly 2 years, but in truth, we were more like polite strangers who shared rent, Wi-Fi, and the occasional grocery list. She was a school counselor with a gentle voice and a habit of leaving handwritten notes on the fridge, reminders like "Don't forget trash day" or "There's soup in the fridge if you re hungry." I always thanked her, but I rarely stayed long enough to ask how her day had been. That afternoon, though, she looked nothing like the calm woman who watered plants on Sunday mornings. Her sweater hung off one shoulder, her hair was twisted in a messy knot, and there was flour on her sleeve as if she had started baking and then forgotten why. I asked her what happened, but she only shook her head and pointed toward my room. The door was closed. I never closed it when I traveled. I felt a cold line run down my back. I left my suitcase in the hallway and walked toward the bedroom. Each step sounded too loud. My mind went to thieves, broken windows, stolen things, maybe a leak in the ceiling or a collapsed shelf. But when I opened the door, none of those things were there. My room was clean. Too clean. The bed was made with fresh sheets. The curtains were open. A small lamp glowed beside the bed, though it was still daylight. And curled in the center of my blanket was a little boy, asleep, one hand tucked under his cheek, his hair damp with sweat. For a moment, I could not breathe. He looked about 6 years old. Thin wrists. Mud on the cuffs of his pants. A small bruise near his temple. Beside him sat a plastic grocery bag holding a juice box, a half-eaten sandwich, and a toy airplane with one wing broken off. I turned back to Marceline, my chest tightening with confusion and fear. She told me, in a voice that barely held together, that his name was Oren. He was one of the children at the school where she worked. That morning, he had shown up alone at the back entrance before classes began, barefoot, shaking, and asking for her. His mother, a woman named Celeste, had been taken to the hospital after collapsing at a bus stop. There was no father listed. No nearby relatives answering calls. Child services had been contacted, but everything was moving slowly because of paperwork, overcrowded offices, and a weekend emergency schedule. Marceline could not leave him in the school building. She could not send him back to an empty motel room. So she brought him home. I stared at the sleeping child on my bed and felt irritation rise before compassion could reach me. I was ashamed of it even then. I was tired. I was behind on reports. My back hurt. My own life felt like a suitcase I never got to unpack. I asked Marceline why she used my room. She swallowed hard and said the living room noise scared him, and her room had boxes stacked everywhere from a closet repair. My room, she said, was quiet. Safe. He had fallen asleep almost immediately. Safe. The word landed somewhere deep. I wanted to protest. I wanted to say this was not my responsibility. But then Oren stirred, his little fingers gripping my blanket like he was holding on to the edge of the world. In that tiny movement, something inside me shifted. I remembered being 8 years old, sitting outside a hospital room while my own mother fought through the night after a car accident. I remembered adults speaking above me like I was furniture. I remembered wanting one person to look down and tell me I had not disappeared. So I lowered my voice and asked what we needed to do. That was how the longest day of my life began. The afternoon stretched into evening with phone calls, forms, unanswered numbers, and the steady hum of worry. Oren woke around 5 and immediately sat up in panic, his eyes darting around the unfamiliar room. Marceline rushed in with warm milk and soft words, but he looked past her toward me. I stood awkwardly in the doorway, still wearing my wrinkled travel shirt, feeling like an intruder in my own life. He asked if I was angry because he slept in my bed. The question was so small and so careful that it broke something open in me. I told him no, I was not angry. I told him beds were meant for tired people, and he looked very tired. He nodded, but did not smile. We ate dinner at the kitchen table while the sky outside turned gold. Marceline made rice, eggs, and toast because it was all we had enough of. Oren ate slowly, like someone afraid the food might be taken away if he enjoyed it too much. He kept looking at the door every time a car passed outside. I asked if he liked airplanes, pointing to the broken toy beside his plate. He said his mother told him planes were proof that heavy things could still rise. Then he looked down, ashamed of having said too much. I had no answer for that. I only pushed the last piece of toast toward him. As night approached, the apartment became a fragile shelter. Marceline checked her phone every few minutes for updates from the hospital. I called my manager and said I had a family emergency, though I did not explain that the family was not mine. At 9, the hospital finally confirmed Celeste was alive but unconscious. Severe exhaustion, dehydration, untreated infection. She had been working 2 cleaning jobs while living with Oren in a weekly motel after losing their apartment. The social worker said someone would come in the morning. In the morning. Those 3 words explained Marceline's whisper. You won't be sleeping tonight. Oren refused to sleep unless someone sat near the door. Marceline was already trembling from exhaustion, so I took the first turn. I sat on the floor outside my bedroom with my back against the wall, listening to the small sounds of a child fighting sleep. At first, I resented it. My phone buzzed with emails. My body ached. My mind kept counting all the ways this was not my problem. But every time I began to drift, Oren whispered from the dark, asking whether hospitals had blankets, whether his mother would know where he was, whether bad things happened faster at night. Each question pulled me further away from the man I had become and closer to the boy I had once been. Around midnight, he asked if I had a mother. I said yes, but she had passed away when I was young. The room went quiet. Then he said he was sorry in such a grown-up way that I almost cried. I told him she used to sing when she was nervous. He asked what song. I could barely remember the tune, but I hummed what I could. It was broken and low, nothing beautiful, yet after a while his breathing softened. I stayed there until sunrise. By morning, the world looked ordinary again, which felt almost cruel. People walked dogs outside. Delivery trucks rolled by. Someone laughed on the sidewalk. Inside our apartment, Marceline made coffee with shaking hands while Oren sat wrapped in my blanket, watching cartoons with the sound low. When the child services worker arrived, she was kind but tired, carrying a clipboard and too many cases in her eyes. Her name was Ivara. She explained the system as gently as she could. Oren would likely be placed in emergency foster care until Celeste recovered or a relative could be found. The moment Oren heard the word placed, he stopped moving. He did not cry. That was worse. He simply folded into himself, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the floor. Marceline looked at me, and I knew she was thinking the same thing I was trying not to think. We were not prepared. We were not family. We had jobs, bills, problems, old wounds. But there are moments when life does not ask whether you are ready. It asks whether you are human. Ibarra said there was a temporary kinship-style emergency option if a responsible adult already known to the child's school counselor could provide safe housing for 48 hours while the hospital and agency searched for family. Marceline immediately volunteered. But her building background check had an unresolved paperwork issue from a previous address. Then Ibarra turned to me. I almost said no. The word rose to my tongue with all its reasonable excuses. I traveled too much. I did not know children. I had no extra bed. I was not emotionally equipped. But Oren looked up at that exact moment. Not hopeful. Hopeful would have been easier. He looked prepared to be disappointed. Like disappointment was a coat he had worn so long it fit him. So I said yes. The next 2 days changed the apartment completely. My room became Oren's room. I slept on the couch, badly, with a stiff neck and a strange peace I did not understand. Marceline borrowed clothes from neighbors. I bought a toothbrush, socks, a small blue backpack, and a new toy airplane from a corner store that also sold batteries and lottery tickets. Oren accepted the plane with both hands but did not play with it until he thought no one was watching. When he finally did, he flew it carefully over the couch, whispering engine sounds under his breath. The hospital updates were slow. Celeste woke briefly, confused and frightened, then slept again. When Ibarra arranged a supervised call, Oren clutched the phone so hard his knuckles turned pale. His mother's voice came through weak and raspy, but alive. She told him she loved him more than morning. He pressed his forehead to the phone and said he had been brave, but only a little. That sentence nearly destroyed me. On the third day, I went back to work remotely. Or at least I tried. But spreadsheets blurred in front of me. Numbers felt absurd while a little boy sat at the table drawing houses with big windows and no doors. When my manager complained about my missed deadlines, I apologized, then muted the call as Oren asked whether people could get sick from being sad too long. I looked at him, then at my laptop, and for the first time in years, I understood how much of my life had been spent proving myself to people who would replace me by Monday. That evening, Marceline found me washing dishes long after they were clean. She thanked me for saying yes. I told her not to make me sound noble. I had almost refused. She said almost refusing was not the same as refusing. Then she told me something I had never known. She had grown up in foster care. Not all bad homes, not all good ones, but enough uncertainty to recognize terror in a child's silence. That was why she brought Oren home. Not because it was proper. Because once, no one had done it for her. The apartment felt different after that confession. Marceline was no longer just my roommate. She was someone who had survived storms quietly. Someone who left soup in the fridge because she knew hunger had many forms. On the fourth morning, Ibarra called. They had found Celeste's older aunt in another city, but the woman was recovering from surgery and could not travel for several days. Celeste was improving, but she would need treatment and rest. The agency asked if we could keep Oren a little longer under emergency approval. This time, I did not hesitate. Days became a rhythm. Daytime, as requested by life itself, became our healing ground. Sunlight through the kitchen blinds. Pancakes shaped badly like airplanes. Walks to the small park 2 streets over, where Oren slowly remembered how to run. Marceline taught him how to plant basil seeds in a chipped mug. I taught him how to fold paper planes, though he was better at it than I was. At first, he asked permission for everything, to sit, to drink water, to touch the remote. Slowly, the questions changed. Could he help stir the soup? Could he draw a picture for his mother? Could he call the couch a runway? Yes, we told him again and again. Yes. But healing is not a straight road. Some nights he woke crying. Some afternoons he became angry over tiny things, like a missing sock or a sandwich cut the wrong way. Once, he knocked the new airplane off the table and shouted that nothing stayed fixed anyway. I wanted to correct him, to tell him not to throw things. Instead, I sat on the floor beside the broken wing and said maybe some things needed fixing more than once. He stared at me for a long time, then crawled into my lap without asking. I held him as carefully as if he were made of glass and fire. A week later, Celeste was well enough for a visit. We drove Oren to the hospital under a bright white morning sky. He wore his cleanest shirt and held the drawing he had made, a picture of 3 people standing beside a house with big windows and one open door. In the hospital hallway, his courage vanished. He froze outside her room. I knelt beside him and told him heavy things could still rise. His eyes filled with tears because he knew those were her words. When he walked in, Celeste began to sob. She was thin, with tired eyes and hands that shook as she reached for him. Oren climbed onto the bed, and they held each other like the world had ended and begun again in the same breath. Marceline turned away, crying silently. I stood near the door, feeling something inside me loosen after years of being tied too tight. Celeste thanked us again and again, but shame covered her gratitude. She apologized for being poor, for being sick, for needing help, for letting her son become someone else's responsibility. I told her the only thing I knew for sure: people are not burdens because they need help. They are people. And people are supposed to carry each other when the road gets too steep. She looked at me like no one had said something gentle to her in a very long time. Over the next month, life rearranged itself around recovery. Celeste's aunt arrived, fierce and loving, with a cane, a suitcase, and a voice that could frighten hospital billing departments. Marceline helped connect Celeste with community housing support through the school. I used vacation days I had been saving for a trip I never planned and drove them to appointments. Oren started staying with his great-aunt while Celeste healed, but he came to our apartment every Saturday afternoon. Daylight visits, he called them, because he said bad things were smaller in the sun. One Saturday, he brought back the toy airplane, the old broken one from the first night. He had taped the wing clumsily, with too much clear tape wrapped around the middle. He handed it to me and said I should keep it. I asked why. He said because it knew my room first. I placed it on my bookshelf, where it stayed. Months passed. Celeste found part-time work at the school cafeteria, then a room in a small apartment complex near Oren's school. Marceline and I no longer lived like strangers. We cooked together. We argued about laundry. We learned each other's histories in quiet pieces. Sometimes, after long workdays, I still felt the old emptiness calling me back to a life of closed doors and unanswered messages. But then I would see the taped airplane on the shelf and remember that my room had once become a harbor because a frightened child needed somewhere to rest. Near the end of summer, Oren invited us to a school event called Family Day. I almost did not go because of work, habit, and fear of belonging where I had no official title. But Marceline stood in the doorway holding my keys and said some invitations are really bridges. So we went. The playground was bright with paper banners, music, and children running in every direction. Oren spotted us from across the yard and waved both arms like he was guiding planes to land. Celeste stood nearby, healthier now, smiling with tears already waiting in her eyes. When Oren's teacher asked him to introduce the people with him, he pointed to his mother first, then his great-aunt, then Marceline. Finally he pointed at me and paused, thinking hard. My heart braced for the awkwardness of not having a name for what I was. Then he said, "That's Soren." He stayed awake so I could sleep. The words hit me harder than any title could have. I looked away, but not fast enough to hide my tears. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who still believes good people exist, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to Ancient Truth. Sometimes one story can remind someone not to give up. Special request: Merit heavy things can still rise if you believe kindness can become someone's miracle. I came home from a work trip believing my life was small, tired, and already decided. I thought my room was just a room, my bed was just a bed, and my silence was something I had earned. But one frightened boy, one brave roommate, and one impossible night taught me that home is not defined by who owns the walls. Home is the place where someone chooses not to turn away. And yes, Marceline was right. I did not sleep that night. But because I stayed awake, a child slept safely. Because a child slept safely, a mother found the strength to heal. Because a mother healed, a family rose. And because they rose, I finally understood that the life I thought had passed me by was still standing at the door, whispering, "Open it."